Good afternoon. Confirm if Mwalimu is audible or not.
Good afternoon, sir.
Great. That's the Mwalimu is very audible. Yeah, so we pick it up from where we left Sun. And last time, remember, we looked at very interesting concepts in relation to aspect of cost estimation. Today allowed us to bring in, of course, a whole new concept, which will also be very interesting for us to be able to master it well. And the concept that I want us to handle today, of course, is all about learning curve. It's all about the concept of learning curve. All about the concept of learning curve, and that's what I want us to handle today. Learning curve concept. Very about learning curve. Remember, this is still under cost estimation. This is still under cost estimation, yeah. So when you're talking about learning curve, what do you need to understand? Yeah. So learning curve, we'll find that is a concept derived from a case what normally tends to affect us on our day-to-day operations, whereby in this case we find that when you are new in doing, of course, something, you might tend to take a lot of time. But the more you do that aspect, the more you gain experience, the more you gain the knowledge in performing that specific task. Say for example, maybe today you have a chance, or rather you got a chance, and maybe you are working in say like you got a chance in an audit firm, for example. Probably it is your first time, you've never been in an audit firm. However good you are, you literally have zero experience in relation to how things are being done. So maybe you'll be given an audit file. This audit file, because you're new, maybe first time doing the watching and the rest, maybe you start with watching process. Watching process, maybe it might take you say like 1 week, because you're very new. The more you work, you'll find that watching that one file maybe will take you say like almost up to, from 1 week, it reduced to say like 4 days. The more you continue working, the more you continue getting experience and knowledge, you'll find that the same file maybe might come to the point whereby it will take you, like say, like 2 days to do watching. You continue working, you continue gathering experience to the point that maybe it will take you 1 day. Meaning that once it reaches 1 day, you cannot go below 1 day, just remain constant. So what has been happening here is that when you are new in doing something, it will tend to take you much time to do that task. The more you do that task, the more knowledge and experience you're going to gather, and the more faster you'll continue doing that task. So what is happening here is a concept of learning curve. See, this is what you're referring to as what? The learning curve. See, learning curve concept. See? So the whole idea behind learning curve is just a matter of us to understand that I'll be having scenarios whereby the more experience I gather, the more less time I'll be taking in performing specific tasks. So having that in mind, then let's jump straight and see. Have something on the same, which I want us to note. You can write something on that. You can write, you can mention something and say that learning curve theory applies to situations. Learning curve theory applies to situations where the workforce as a whole improves in efficiency. Learning curve theory applies to situations where the workforce as a whole improves in efficiency with experience. Learning curve concept applies to situations where the workforce as a whole improves. The workforce as a whole improves in efficiency with experience. Improves in efficiency with experience. See, the way Mwalimu was saying that the more you do a particular task, the more experience you're going to have, and the more faster you'll be performing probably a specific task. That's what you're referring to as what? As a learning curve. See? So in this case, we find that it will bring us to one big element. All of the experience that you're seeing you're earning, this will bring us to the element of what? Time. It will bring us to the element of time. So this is to say, at all times, whenever we are looking at the concept of learning curve, time will be the main factor here. And time, in our case, we're looking at hours, which these hours will translate to what? Cost, because we are literally paying on hours. So hours, then that will translate to the component of what? The component of cost. So in this case, Mwalimu will want to guide us on a very specific elements. What are these costs that then will be affected by the learning curve? What are these costs that then will be affected by the learning curve? To look at costs affected by the learning curve concepts. Costs affected by the learning curve concepts. Costs affected by the learning curve concept. What are these costs that are going to be affected by the learning curve? What are these costs that are going to be affected by the learning curve? Number one, we talk about direct labor time and costs. Direct labor time and costs. Direct labor time and costs. Number two, we have variable overhead costs. Variable overhead costs. Variable overhead costs, variable overhead costs. If they vary with direct labor hours worked, variable overhead costs, if they vary with direct labor hours worked. Variable overhead costs, if they vary with direct labor hours worked. So you'll find that all times, my good students, the summary will always be, anytime you are handling the concept of learning curve, what we need to understand here is one main element, that all these costs that are affected by time, they will be subjected to the concept of what? Learning curve. Say, for example, material costs. Material costs at no any given point will be affected by the aspect of time factor. So material costs will not be affected by time factor. When you read about the aspect of these costs will always remain constant regardless of how things are changing. So physicals will also not be affected by the aspect of the time factor. So the secret here is to understand that when you're dealing with the learning curve concept, we concentrate on these costs that are going to be affected by the element of time. That is very important to note. That is very, very important for us to be able to go to note. That's very important for us to be able to note. Okay. So, like what we did under the aspects of estimations, when you look at the methods of our cost estimations, you'll find that we were dealing with linear equations. But when you're dealing with learning curve, we need to understand that learning curve is a non-linear equation. See, learning curve is a non-linear equation. Learning curve is a non-linear equation. See, non-linear. This is a non-linear equation. Yeah, this is a non-linear equation. Many a times we might refer to it as what? The time function. This is time function. Time function. So, how will we determine these equations of the learning curve? For learning curve equations, we normally tend to talk of only two. That is the average cost of time, y bar, which will give us ax raised to power b. In this context, we read about the average time. This is the average time. And we will be talking about the total time, which will be ax raised to power 1 plus b. So this will give us what? The total time. So this will give us total time. I'll explain the variables here. Molim will explain the variables. So looking at our variables, the first element, y bar, simply, this will give us what? Average time of producing a unit of a product. This is the average time of producing a unit of a product. Average time of producing a unit of a product. We have y. This will give us cumulative total time. This will give us cumulative total time of producing a unit. Cumulative total time, these are cumulative total time of production. Cumulative total time of production. See? We have A, which will give us what we're referring to as time or cost of producing the first unit. This is the time or cost of producing the first unit. Of producing the first unit. We have X. This will simply give us cumulative production level. Keyword is cumulative. Cumulative production level. Cumulative production level. Then, in this case, the B element here, when you read about B in this context, we are looking at the learning index. This is simply our learning index. And for us to determine our learning index, we must always learn this. Yeah. For us to determine our learning index, this is a very key element to consider. It will be affecting us most of the time. So for learning index, to determine this value of B, we'll always be talking about our learning index, which is B. We'll always talk about log R, that is log the learning rate, divided by log 2. That will give us what? The aspect of B. How to determine the value of B, which is our learning index. Log R is simply the learning rate, divided by log 2. Divide by log 2. Divide by log 2. That is very important to note So jumping straight to the other element here, why are we terming this as a learning curve? This is a scenario. The reason why we are referring to this as a learning curve, you'll find that this is what we'll be having. Yeah. We have this cave here. We have this cave. Yeah. I hope my hands will be straight. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not a member of that church. So,
Which church?
Why is it not straight? Yeah. I'm not a member of that church. Yeah. You know, like there are those members of church that they cannot draw a straight line, right? They always tend to draw a zigzag line. Yeah. Bernice, you're asking which church? Are you a member of that church? Bernice, you're a member. Yeah. So we have a straight element like that. I hope mine is straight. Yeah. Lincoln, are you a member of this church of drawing no straight things? Yeah. You're given something you cannot draw straight. Yeah. Members to Nawajua, we know the members. Yeah. Bernice, you're just a supplier. Okay. Yeah. So we're saying that these are aspects of production. These aspects of production. And these are aspects of time. See, these are aspects of time. So learning curve will apply in a case whereby you see you are very new in doing something. So of course, you might tend to take a lot of time. So you're very new, you see, you're going to take that time. Experience, you gather experience, what will happen? The time will be reducing. More experience, time will be reducing. You see, like your time is high, production is low. You gain an experience, your time reduces, production increases. You gain more experience, production increases. These are T1, T2, T3. See? So you reach a time whereby, regardless of how experienced you are, that time will remain to be constant. Regardless of how experienced you are, the time will remain to be constant. See? The time will remain to be constant, regardless of how good you are, regardless of maybe the experience that you have. See that the time will just remain to be constant. Regardless of how good you are, you reach the stretch limit, whereby you cannot go beyond that. You reach the stretch limit. You cannot go beyond that. So the whole idea is that the more experienced I am, the lesser time I'm going to take in performing a task. But reality will come in place whereby, regardless of how good you are, the production will just be constant in terms, or rather, the time will just be constant. The time will just be constant of doing some stuff. So it will reach a point whereby the learning curve will cease. It will reach a time whereby the learning curve will cease. The learning curve will stop. And production will be constant all through. And production will be constant all through. So that is one main element of learning curve that we need to do, or that we need to understand. You reach a time whereby production will stop and the learning curve will be constant all through. So at this point, we have but introduced, of course, the concept of learning curve, which will be very vital from now henceforth. This concept of learning curve will be very, very vital as we proceed. So once we have that, then the other key element that I also want us to learn in relation to learning curve concept is, at times, we will be required to determine our average time directly. at times you'll be required to determine your average time directly. Okay, you'll be required to determine your average time. You'll be required to determine your average time directly. So many a times, if I told you to determine our average time directly, where you're given the cumulative now, it's the onus to come up with the aspect of the average time, you'll always find that you'll always be doing what? You'll always be taking, of course, our cumulative time. Cumulative time, we're going to divide by our units. Okay. We're going to divide by our units. We're going to divide by our units. So this is important. This is very important for us. This is very, very important for us. This is very, very important for us. So the secret that Mwalimu is sharing here is that whenever we are dealing with a learning curve, all we need to understand is that we are looking at a factor or a concept that relates with time. And if it relates with time, you will realize that what is affecting us will be the key element. The key element here would be time and cost. Anything not affected by learning curve, you'll find that anything not affected by the aspect of time, most probably the learning curve effect will not be there. Most probably the learning effect will not be there. So how will you go about this? We jump to our past papers. We jump to our past papers. We jump to our past papers. Yeah, question? Someone?
That average time is equal to what? Cumulative?
Cumulative time divided by the number of units. These are units. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
These are units. Right? So we jump to a question here. Where is go to our past papers. See what we will learning curve concept. But if I told you just master that at this point you're looking at it on an angle that it is a time factor that is going to be affected. Many times interpreting and working out these portions will always be very easy. Will always be very easy. Will always be very easy. So we want to look at, of course, as a new thing, you have to start with the easy one as we progress. So let us see the question here. Is that question for November 18, question 5? November 18, question 5. November 18, question number 5, yeah? November 18, question number 5. So if at all you all check that part, yeah. So these are what you're told, question number 5. Part C specifically, yeah. What is happening here? Part C specifically. That Z has received an order to supply 30 units of product A. So far, 14 units have been completed. The first unit required 40 direct labor hours, and a total of 240 direct labor hours have been recorded for the 14 units. So Z Limited has received, yes, an order to supply 30 units of product A. So far, only 14 units have been completed. The first unit required 40 direct labor hours, and a total of 240 direct labor hours have been recorded for the 14 units. Additional information you're told. The production manager expects an 80% learning curve effect for this type of work. The company uses standard absorption costing method. The cost attributable to the center in which product A is manufactured are as follows: direct materials, direct labor, variable overheads, and fixed overheads. Fixed overheads, you're given 6,000 per 4-week operational period. Okay. Required, we need to determine the learning curve index. We need to determine the learning curve index as our first requirement. The learning curve index. So learning curve index, remember, in this case, is a value that Mwalimu talked about, the value of B. This is a B that we'll be looking at. This is a B that we will be looking at, the learning curve index. So given that it is our B, Mwalimu has guided us on how to determine our B. You guys, you have the question, that's why I've removed it from the case. We have the value of B, or we know how to determine that index. So here comes the case that according to our good examiner, he wanted us to determine our learning curve index, and you're given 2 marks only. So given that we have the knowledge, right, of learning curve, this will be very easy for us. So how will you go about it? Determining our B, we know very well I'll be required to take log R, we divide by log 2. Our learning rate, we are given 80%, which is the same as what? 0.8. So to determine my B, this will be easy. How will you go about it? We talk of log R, which is log 0.8. we divide by log, of course, what? The log 2. So we have log 0.8, we divide by log 2. That will give us what value? What will be our learning index? Someone to give Mwalimu? Give me at least into 3 decimal places.
Negative 0.3219.
Negative
0.3219.
So we take negative 0.3219. So 322. 0.3219. So that is the same as negative 0.322. So this is our learning index. Higher. We come and check the other part of the question. The other part of the question, these are what we are told, that the unit cost. See, we are told the unit cost. So at this point, this is what we need to understand, yeah? That for us to determine our unit cost with the knowledge that we had, unit cost will always comprise of, number one, material cost, will always comprise of the labor cost, will always comprise of the overhead cost. So that as at the end of the day, this will give us what? Our unit cost. We've agreed that learning curve will affect which component of cost? Learning curve will affect what?
Labor.
The labor cost. See. And therefore, having noted that learning curve will affect the only, which is our labor cost, then the next thing will also be very important for us, yeah? The next info will be very, very important for us. And this is what will be required to do. Moment here, let me change this back to ours. So you're saying that the learning curve will only affect this component of labor cost, the labor cost. And we know very well, all times when you are required to determine your labor cost, we'll always be talking about the labor hours times the labor rate per hour. This will give us what? Our total labor cost, labor hours times the aspect of the labor rate per hour. So many a times learning curve, other than it can help us to determine the total cost, it can also help us to determine what? The labor hours. These are very important information that Mwalimu is sharing with us. But the concept of learning curve will find that majorly will affect this part of labor cost. And for us to determine this labor cost, we are talking about the labor hours times the labor rate per hour. So having that in mind, what's the next step here? The next step is for us to go to our question. The next step is for us to go to our question here. And in our question, we clearly see that part 2, the good examiner is asking us to determine our unit cost. So to determine our unit cost, look at note number 3. We are told the cost attributable to the center in which product A is manufactured are as follows. So we are given our cost, unit cost. We want to determine our unit cost here. Material cost, you're given directly per unit, you're given 30. Labor cost per unit, this is what we want to determine. The variable overheads, we can also see that the variable overheads, this one also relates to what? This one also relates to aspect of our labor. So again, we have to determine our labor hours for us to determine our variable OHDs. Then we are told in this case that that is direct labor. Of course, you're told like that was per hour. Direct labor, you're given 6 shillings per hour. Remember what you're doing here? This is a unit, and you're given per hour basis. Yeah, we have fixed overhead 6,000 per 4-week operating period. So we'll also be having what? Our fixed OHDs. So that as at the end of the day, the total here will give us what the good examiner wants us to determine. The starting point would be on labor cost. On labor cost. We know very well that labor cost, we've agreed, anytime you hear about labor cost, Mwalimu was given us here. Hear about the labor hours times the labor rate per hour. Our concept of learning curve is the aspect of labor to be affected. So how will you go about it? Come and consider our labor. So talk about our labor. So we're having our labor here, and we said for us to determine our labor using the learning curve concept, we should always be talking about our aspect of Y, total labor cost. AX 1 plus B. To determine what? Our total labor hours. Total labor hours. Important to note, very important here. Let us identify our variables now, my good students. Let us identify our variables. Identifying our variables, what will we be having here? Number one, we need to talk about our A. Do you have our A? We've said that A, we are looking at the time of producing the first what? The first unit. Do you have that? Do you have our A?
But
40. So we take A to be 40, identifying our variables, 40. X. Do you have our cumulative production? Do you have our cumulative production? How many units?
But
Based on our question, you're told like, has received an order to supply how many units? 30 units of product A. So far, 40 units have been completed. So far, 14 units have been completed. So far, 14 units have been completed. So ideally here, we can all agree that our cumulative production, in this case, is 30 total cumulative production. But what happened in that the first unit required 40 direct hours, and a total of 240 direct labor hours have been recorded for the 14 units. For the 14 units. So we have our cumulative production here, which we're given that total cumulative production. Do you have a learning index, my good students? Learning index, which is B. Have we determined that? We have determined B, right? Negative 0.322. I need someone to give Mwalimu then what will be our total labor hours. What will be our Y here? Very fast. 40 times 30 raised to power 1 plus minus 0.322. Give me that value very fast. How much are we getting? For 1.37, Lincoln is giving us for 1.37. For 1.37.
Also have the same answer.
Same answer. Okay. For 1.37. So we go with that, right? Because at this point, all we want to consider is taking 1 minus, of course, our value. So that is, we take 1 plus minus 0.322 to give us 0.678. 30 raised for our answer. We have 40 minus 40 times answer to give us for 1.37 hours. For 1.37 hours. So these are the total hours that we are going to require. Regardless of where we're told like the first 40 took to 40, if at all you're asked to get probably the difference of producing the other hours, then you could have gone like that. But this one you can do it directly. Once we have this case, can we now determine our labor cost? Can we now determine our labor cost? Can we now determine our labor cost? We can determine our labor cost very easily now. Remember, our task here is on a per unit basis. So what you can do, because our value are given, of course, in total, this is what you can do. Determine our case in total, then you come and determine on a per unit basis, yeah? So direct labor hours, or talk about material cost. Let us determine in total so that you can now go ahead and divide by the number of units. I want to determine what will be our total material cost. Per unit, we are charging 30. How many units did we produce? We produced how many units? Was it 30 units, right? Check our question. 100. Labor cost, we've seen that we have 401.37 hours, and each hour we are paying how much? Each hour we are paying how much? 6. For variable overheads, we are told that 0.5 per direct labor hours. So this one we have 0.5 per direct labor hours, which we determined for 1.37. Whereas the fixed overheads, you're told we had 6,000 per 4-week operating period. So this is 6,000. So what will be the total cost of production, so that you can determine on a per unit basis? Where you feel you need to ask a question, this is the best time to ask. What would be our total cost here now? What would be our total cost? For 1.37.
The variable overheads you've multiplied by what?
Variables always you're given 0.5. You're taking
okay.
on the
Okay.
question, okay? 0.5.
Okay, okay.
So you're having for 1.37 times 6, giving us 2408.22. 2408.22. 0.5 times 41.37, giving us 200 here, 0.69. Total, if we sum it up, 900 plus 2408.22 plus 200.69 plus 6,000, which is giving us 950. 08.91. I want on a per unit basis. So cost per unit therefore would be, we take 9508.91 divide by 30, which will give us, divide by 30, 316.96 per unit. Imagine just like that. So the main essence of learning curve is to simply determine the component of hours, just as Mwalimu had guided us. We want to determine, or our focus mainly is on the aspect of what? The aspect of hours. Hours, hours, hours. That is the main goal. Hours, hours, hours. That is the main goal here. That is our main goal. Hours, hours, hours. That is our main goal. Have it. Where you need to ask a question, make sure you ask. I believe that you're done with that bit. Okay. So let us look at this other question. Before now, Pole, as you're diving deep into the whole concept of learning curve, I want us all to go to this good question, which was tested. That was when? This is a good question. I always love to do it because it will always open us very well. Look at this question, May 2017. A very good question there. May 2017. May 2017. Question number 2, specifically part B. 17, question number 2, part B. 17, May 17, question number 2, part B. May 17, question number 2, part B. Make sure that we are all there. Make sure that you are all there. Make sure that you are all there. Let us go through that question together. We're told that Jumbo Limited is a multi-product firm. The company intends to launch a new product branded ZP in the coming months. Production will be in batches of 1,000 units throughout the life of the product. It is expected to achieve a 90% learning curve, but the learning will cease. You see, when Mwalimu introduced the concept of learning curve, we mentioned that it reached a point whereby this learning will always, or rather the aspect of learning curve will cease and production will be constant all through. So we're told that production would be in batches of 1,000 throughout the life of the product. Is expected to achieve a 90% learning curve, but the learning curve or learning will cease after the 64th batch. Other relevant data of the product ZP is as follows. Expected life you're given, selling price per unit, direct material cost per unit, total direct labor cost of the first batch, variable overhead cost per unit, and the total specific fixed cost you're given there. The learning index for a 90% learning curve is negative 0.152. So we are given already the learning curve index. Required, the expected profit to be earned from the product over its lifetime. It has now been established that the learning effect will continue for all the 256 batches that will be produced. So we are required then to determine the learning curve required to achieve a lifetime product profit of 10 million, assuming that a constant learning rate applies through the product's life. So with such a question, you'll find that most important concept would be for us to have understood the whole concept of learning curve. The whole concept of learning curve. Because everything that we'll be doing will just be going back to the main concept of learning curve. And this is what we'll be expected to do. Make sure that you have a question. Make sure that you have the question right. So I want us to do this aspect, my good students. The same concept will apply. Understanding learning curve will affect what? That is what will always be required to do. Just to understand that anytime you're dealing with learning curve will affect specific items that are affected by labor hours. So based on our question here, based on the question that you're given, based on the question that you're given. Number one, we were asked, of course, to determine the expected profit to be earned from the product over its lifetime. We all know that when you want to determine our profit, looking at our profit statement, our profit statement will always comprise of this. I will be required, number one, to have what? Our sales. We have the cost given, where we're given direct material cost, where we're given direct material cost. Direct material cost. We are given direct labor cost. We need to determine direct labor cost. We are given aspect of variable overhead costs, variable OHDs, and we are given specific fixed costs. Specific fixed costs. So we start by considering our sales. How much are we given as our sales, my good students? How many units are we selling? You have the question. Don't allow Mwalimu to have the question again because you have the question anyway there. How many units are we selling as per what you are given by a good examiner? How many units? We have the question. Yeah?
256,000.
We have 256,000. And each unit you are selling at how much?
23.
So we have 256,000. We multiply by 123. That will give us total sales of 256 times 123. 31.8 million. 31,488. Direct material cost per unit, how much? 36. So you take 256,000 times 36, which this will give us 256,000 times 36 to give us what? 9,216,000. Labor cost. We know very well that this will be affected by learning curve. Variable overhead cost per unit, 24,000. 24. So you take 256,000 by 24, which would give us 256 by 24 to give us a value of 6,144,000. 6,144,000. Specific fixed cost, 3,875,000. 3,875,000. So that as at the end of the day, This will give us our total cost. From total cost, to deduct to give us our profit. So this is what we should be having, yeah? To determine our profit, this is what we should be having. We are not given direct labor cost directly. And that is where the learning curve concept will come in play. That is where the learning curve concept will come in play. Yeah? So we've agreed that anytime I am dealing with learning curve concept, ax raised to power b plus 1. Very important. Let us identify our variables, my good students. Let us identify our variables. Let us identify our variables. Do you have our A? What is our A? Time or cost of producing the first batch or unit?
52,500.
52,500. Cumulative production. What is our cumulative production, my good students here? What would be our cumulative production? One that in this case, we're told that it reaches a point whereby the learning curve ceased. So the other components were not affected, of course, by the learning curve concept. I need someone to give me then what will we be having as our cumulative productions here? X. In such an event, the good examiner is telling us that, you know what? If we are considering this learning curve in terms of our production up to the 64th batch, all this production was affected by the learning curve concept. But after the 54th batch, the learning curve ceased, meaning that the rest of the items were not affected by the learning curve. So in such an event, we'll always be required to determine my total cost would be, we take the total cost which was affected by the learning curve, and the exact other part that was not affected by the learning curve. Remember, this equation will only affect the one that was affected by the learning curve. Otherwise, after the learning curve ceased, the cost or time of producing one unit or batch, it remained the same. So let us do this. I need us to determine what was our total batches, given that these were given per batch. What was our total batches? How many batches are we going to count here?
64. Total for
How many batches? Total number of units we had 256,000. And each batch contained how many units? As per our question?
1,000 units.
1,000. So how many batches are we talking in total?
56.
256 batches. What is the number of batches that was affected by the learning curve? Batches affected by the learning curve?
64.
Batches affected, we have 64. So how many batches were not affected by the learning curve?
192.
Good. So my good students, the concept here would be, we want to determine what was the total cost of the batches that were affected by the learning curve. After the learning ceased, we had other 192. So what again was the total cost of this 192? This is what we want to look at in this question of ours. This is what we want to consider in this question of ours. This is what we want to consider in this question of ours here. A moment here. So you're saying that, of course, the 192 won't be affected by the learning curve. That is okay. So this 192 will not be affected by the learning curve concept. So I need us then to determine that cost. Up to the 64th batch, we had a component of learning. But after the 64th batch, the component of learning ceased, and meaning that we're talking about what? The constant, we're talking about constant hour or cost. So I want us to determine what is this constant cost that I'll be having all through the 192 batches. So we have our case. X, therefore, allowed to consider, I want to determine that batch, the last batch that we produced, and the one that will remain constant all through. So how will you go about it? Can we determine our case? First of all, let us clear with our variables. So x have dash here. What about our b? Can we determine our b? What was our b? Give me our b very fast. Give me our b very fast.
Negative 0.152.
Because you're thinking about log 2, divide by log 0.9, divide by log 2, right?
Yes, but it was given direct.
We were given directly, which were given negative
0.152.
152. Good. So all that I need here is this x. So what are we going to do? For x, I want us to determine for the 64th batch. And I also want us to determine for the 63rd batch. So this would give us that time that we took to produce the last batch, which was 64. And that is a time that will be constant in all our production. So therefore, we have it here. We have it here. Y or A will not change. So A, we read about A to be 52,500 times X, which is 64, raised to power negative 0.152. So in that case, plus 1, that will give us what? Negative 0.152 plus 1.
0.848.
0.848.
848.
Then we do 52,500 times the 63rd batch, 0.848. This should give us how much after working it out? 64 raised to 0.848. times 52,500.
Where did that 0.85 come from?
B
Sorry.
plus 1.
Okay.
So negative 0.152 plus 1, right?
Okay. 1 plus.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, great. 1785, 664.73, 52,500. So we have 63 raised to power 0.848 times 52,500. 1761,976.41. So this is a point where I want us to get it very clearly. This is a point where I want us to get it very clearly. At this point, whatever that we are doing here, we want to determine what was the cost of producing this batch that will remain constant all through. The reason being that we are told our learning stopped at 64 batch, at the 64th batch. So we've agreed, based on the concept of learning curve, that when it reaches a point where learning curve has stopped, they will be having a constant production all through in terms of cost or hours. So this cost that you are determining here is the cost that will be constant in the production of the 192 batches. So therefore, this cost will be how much? Cost per batch for the next 192 batches. We have 1785, 664.73 less 1761, 976.41, which will give us 23, 688.32. So each batch of the 192, I'll be producing it at 23.688. Where you're having a question, make sure you ask. Where you have a question, this is the best time to ask. We're having a question, this is the best time to ask. We're having a question, this is the best time to ask. So therefore, determining our total labor cost. My labor cost, therefore, will agree that number one, will take the cost of producing the first 64 batches, which will be 1785,664.73. The cost of producing the 192 batches, I'll be having 192 times 23,688.32. So that will give us how much? This will give us 23,688.32 times 192 to give us a value of 4,548,157.44. So in total, plus 1785, 664.73, which will agree that in total, I should be talking of 6,333,000 822.17. Where you have a question, make sure you ask. Where you're having a question, make sure that you ask. This is a total cost, total labor cost, yeah? So that now we have determined the missing value here, which we have determined through our learning curve, 6,333,822.17. Because all are in full values, you can just leave it there. 6,333,822. So we determine our cost. We're determining our cost there. So my total cost, I should be having 92.16. We add 633,822, 61.44, 38.75 to give us our value of total cost of what? 25, yeah? So we have 25, 568, 822. Therefore, my profit will therefore be 31,488,000 minus answer to give us 5,919,178. I need a question there where you feel like Mwalimu should explain again. Where you feel like Mwalimu, kindly at this point, I want you to explain again. Where you feel like Mwalimu at this point, kindly, I want you to explain again. Okay. So, the other part, we were told that it has now been established that the learning effect will continue for all the 256 batches that will be produced. The learning curve required to achieve a learning lifetime product profit of 10 million, assuming that a constant learning rate applies throughout the product's life. What the good examiner is telling us that now, this learning curve will not stop at 64 batch. It will continue for all the 256 batches. So we need to determine the learning curve that will give us, instead of 5 million, we have 10 million. So what is that learning curve? What is that learning curve rate that will help us to achieve the 10 million profit, and the learning will continue to 256 batches? That is what the good examiner is asking us here. Try to do that as you're taking a break. We go take lunch. As you're working out that break, we go take lunch. We meet in exactly after 40 minutes.